Now, I didn't know you were from Wichita Falls, and I bet you didn't know I was from Alney, Texas. Alney is about 40 miles south of Wichita Falls, but is as conservative probably as Wichita Falls is. In fact, growing up, I knew that I was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it, much less my hand. Because there was Sweet Pete, wink wink, and Sweet Jimmy. And then there was Ethel, the PE coach, who ran away with Linda Lunn to Fort Worth.
One of her students.
One of her students. Now that was talk in Alney. And Rebecca, I think you saw my script. Everything that you said is what I'm going to say. But I want to tell you, John Neely was hot, hot, hot. And several years ago, when we all knew about Sonny and Cher, Cleo and Mark, Donnie and Marie, George and I decided not to use our last names anymore. So officially, it's just Jack and George. And let me tell you how pleased we are to see each one of you here this evening. This really makes our heart proud. We were very sorry that we missed the last time, but I was in the hospital, tied up to IVs, and there was not one hot nurse in the group. The only thing that I regret from being in the hospital. Know what that is? How many of you have ever seen one of these? Well, how many, raise your hand, how many have this with you? Okay, now, this is where we are today. But this is where we are coming from. Our community has come a long, long way. But do you know tomorrow we're going to have further to go? Tomorrow they're coming out with 5Gs. They're estimated there will be 24 million of these sold before the end of the year. And that's what we've got to concentrate on so that we can catch up with the progress that already have been made. Now, there was a time, and Rebecca, are these your notes too? That the Dallas way, I'm going to tell you, some of you may know, maybe some of you don't, how we got to where we are today. In January of 2011, I was just scanning the television, which I hardly ever do. I'm hooked up on Glee and CNN. But I was scanning and it stopped on an ER program, a KER program, about the gay raid in New York City. Well, going through my very important papers, I pulled up this that says 29 nabbed in raid on apartment. Now this was in Dallas, not New York City. We didn't begin the revolution, but we still brought it up to date. There were, at that time in the bars, Vice Squad would go around and tap people on the shoulder and arrest them for no reason, because homosexuality was against the law. There was no defense. The enlistment form for the military had a checkbox that said, "Are you homosexual?" This was the military. This was when being gay or lesbian was against the law. The police went around because the bars closed at 12 o'clock, and at that time no one was ready to go home. They went around and set up a raid in East Dallas in a vacant apartment, took food and drinks. There were close to 70 people who showed up at the party when the police backed up 7 patrol wagons and arrested everyone that couldn't get out the window or the back door. These people were ruined. Lawyers, physicians, hairstylists, students were ruined because their names were published the next day in the Dallas Times-Herald. Now,
Do I get to say something?
you're next. I have a break in my notes.
Well, I want to tell you that I came to Dallas on a very cold Valentine's Day in 1956. I drove with a friend from Washington, D.C. We had both been kicked out of our jobs because we were gay. He was with the State Department, and I was with the CIA. The details of that episode may come later. However, we wound up in Seagoville because his parents lived there. And after one night in Seagoville, I said, I don't think this is for me. I need the bright lights of Dallas. So the next day, I go and check in the YMCA. The YMCA was a nondescript building, about 8 floors, across the street from the First Baptist Church on St. Paul. And they had about 4 floors that were designated for residents. The rent was $12 a week with maid service. And they had a wonderful cafeteria. So I set up headquarters there. And I loved living there. It was incredibly wild. As a matter of fact, it was also known as the French Embassy. Now, you're on.
Paragraph number 4. Before we go any further, I would like to take this opportunity to give some accolades. After watching that raid in New York on television, I started thinking, and I said, God, if they have that kind of history, so does Dallas. So let's see what potential there is. So I think the first person I talked to was David Taffy, and I said, David, you get out, you get around, tell me what you think. If we send out an email saying, will this fly, what kind of response do you think we will get? Well, we went to the internet, and as you know, you can't send more than 75 emails before they all go into spam. So we flipped through our database and picked out 80 people that we thought would be receptive. You can't imagine the response that we had. At our first meeting at the Resource Center, we had more than 40 people. The number has settled out because we were able in the last year to elect a board. We have an 18-member board of directors. We have a nice bank account. We are incorporated. We are nonprofit, and we feel like that we are going in the right direction. We're delighted that you're here this evening, and would hope that you would be so interested that you want to join us, because we have so many things on our plate that our board can't handle all of them. We need some help. We hope you'll volunteer.
Okay. Am I next?
Next.
In the late 50s, Dallas downtown was alive. I mean, it was just wonderful. The best place to cruise was the Neiman Marcus. They they kept their window display lights on till midnight. Well, it was not unusual to see 10 or 15 queens with their nose pressed against, so looking, one eye was on fashion and the other eye was looking around to see what was happening. It was, in those days, there were no one-way streets. They were all two-way. One night I was checking this scenery out, and I looked down the street and there was a sailor. I said, oh, that's interesting. Let me go down there and check out the naval forces. So I started down there, and all of a sudden there was a two-door white Ford that came zipping down the street, made a U-turn, door flew open, the sailor got in, they took off. Well, I got a good look at that handsome dude driving that Ford, and it was none other than my Jack. So sometime later, when I met him formally, I said, do you drive a two-door white Ford? And he said, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, I think I've seen you before.
Paragraph 5. Yes, I did have a two-door white Ford. He always accused me of it being a company car because I didn't have any air conditioning, I didn't have a heater, and I didn't have a radio, and no wind-up windows. But it was the best that I could afford. And to develop that story a little further, was it wasn't too long after that, maybe a couple of weeks, a mutual friend of ours, who was an antique buyer from Neiman Marcus, was getting ready to go to Europe for 2 clients, Mrs. W.A. Criswell and Mrs. Emma Hogg. And he was giving a going-away party for himself on Sunday afternoon. So he invited both of us. Well, we stayed so long that we were finally the only 2 left. Even he had gone out to eat. George and I went home, and we didn't leave the house for 3 days. Now, we got up on Sunday morning, and across the street in the 2700 block of Reagan Street was a Church of Christ. And we would take our coffee and sit on the porch and watch them come and go. Well, who would know later that it would become the Metropolitan Community Church and now the Resource Center.
We
Yeah.
did have a couple of really interesting bars back in those days. It wasn't all out on the street, but we were terrified going in these bars because of the bite squad. Well, there was one downtown called Zyla's Bandbox. Well, Zyla was a real woman, and she loved the
See, somebody has
Queens.
been there.
And it was right back.
Did you
of,
keep any matchbooks?
It was right back of the Carousel Club, which was Jack Ruby's, and it was on South Packard. She loved the Queens, and apparently she paid the police off because the police never came in there, and we loved that. Well, it so happened that poor old Zyla, her ne'er-do-well husband, lost the bar in a gambling debt. So she was stuck at home with her gay son. There was another bar called the Zoo Bar. It was up on Commerce Street across from Neiman's. And when Neiman's let out, that's where all the queens went for an afternoon cocktail. We had the Burgundy Room, which was a little piano bar in the Adolphus Hotel. And of course, there was that wonderful Century Room off of the lobby at the Adolphus. And they had the Bottoms Up Review started there. Breckwall and Joe Peterson started that right there. And they took that review on to Las Vegas and played up and down the strip for 30 years. and Breck died last year of Alzheimer's. And poor Joe was so stupid, the mafia beat him up and left him for dead, and he had a heart attack. Now, what else did we have down there?
Paragraph 6.
Okay, one more time.
In 1956, I was allowed to resign as manager of the man's shop of Neiman Marcus when they found out I was gay. Homosexuality was against the law, and they justified this by saying that I could be blackmailed into stealing these high-end goods to all the queens that shopped in my shop. They allowed me to resign, but it wasn't until after the Christmas season. They wanted me to spend the Christmas season. Then from 1964, for 13 years, I was manager of the savings department of a large savings and loan association. And I knew that I was getting jumped over for promotions because when we had company functions, I always brought a tough lesbian as my date. So they figured that out. When George and I bought our first home, we paid $14,500 for it, and it was not possible for two men to go on the note. Also, it was not possible to buy an insurance policy on an automobile in two names. In 1950, it was against the law to be homosexual. Military forms, as I have said, had a check mark whether you said yes or no if you were homosexual. There were two men who were murdered in Reverchon Park, and a judge says, they're just queers. We all will remember that. But it wasn't all bad. One of the first gay bars in Oak Lawn was the Throckmorton Mining Company, where we are here tonight. You would drive around the neighborhood to be sure that there were no police cars checking license plates. The first old plantation was over here, right across the street on Hall Street, in a big two-story frame house back of Starbucks. The second one was the fabulous old plantation bar down where you could dance all night.
That was down by the
Where the museum is now.
Yeah.
The Pearl Street Warehouse was a fabulous bar that didn't make it as a straight bar. The Alcatraz bar on Lemon Avenue was fun until they had so many drugs in there that it exploded and caught fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know a lot of y'all, not a lot, but a few of you will remember Lucas B&B downtown. Downtown next to the Adolphus Hotel. Oh, what a fun place. You could always go in there late at night if you didn't make out and have fun with the waitresses. They wore their hair so high that they put their pack of cigarettes up in their hair. I was always intrigued as to how they did that until one of them told me that they had enough hairspray they could go through a Texas tornado. We had a great time when we were young in Dallas, and in spite of trying to keep ahead of the vice squad and keep it out of jail in a raid, it was a fun time, and I loved being in Dallas.
George and I have had an extraordinary life. January of last year, the Dallas Morning News honored us with a half-page article. 50 years together lived out loud. We feel like we brought the Dallas Morning News out of the closet. Although we're really not ready to hang up our skates, we do see a light at the end of the tunnel, and every day that light gets brighter and brighter. So we want to thank everyone who has worked to try to make a difference. And guys, you're the people here who have done that. You're the people who encourage and bring these young people to realize that if we don't cherish our past, we will not have a future. Thank you.